got it. We ready? Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. It's an honor to be up here with my good friend Carrie Asopenko, and grateful that all of you have shown up for this experiment in how to disseminate science in a slightly different manner. By all means, keep eating. We're grateful that you're sharing your lunch with us in a good way. I mean, they're not giving us lunch.
No,
right?
I am here for this, yeah. I'm just waiting for the Johnny ad-libs.
Yeah, these are ad libs.
Yeah.
I'm Johnny Lifshitz. I'm a professor of psychiatry in Arizona, but 6 weeks from now I'll be a professor of PM&R in the University of Michigan.
I'm Carrie Sapanko, and I'm an associate professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai,
In the Department of?
the Department of Rehabilitation and Human Performance.
Hey, that's the same as mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
So the idea here behind our podcast is to take a topic and use 3 different abstracts and posters that were submitted to the conference to disseminate knowledge on a particular topic. Carrie and I went through the abstracts and put together a program, and one that was actually closer to our hearts probably than closer to our minds. What was that topic, Carrie?
So the first session that you're here for today is to talk about intimate partner violence-related brain injury, which I would say is probably a topic close to both our hearts and our minds at this point.
And the bottom line is, many of us who got into or interested in traumatic brain injury never even considered assault-related brain injury. We were considering athletics, we were considering military, we were considering car accidents and maybe workplace accidents. What I find remarkable is how quickly this field has gone from the shadows into the prominence of multiple brain injury societies.
Yeah, when we started some of our consortiums back in the day, we were, sitting in a room with 4, 5, 6 people, and now here we are a few years later, and we have a random podcast at lunch and pretty much a full room.
Correct. And with anything that we do in life, there are biases that we bring, there are prejudices we bring to a particular subject. I know that for many years I brought the bias of an 18-year-old white male athlete to the world of traumatic brain injury. And when we think about intimate partner violence and brain injury in a new context, we have to set aside some of those biases and some of those prejudices as well.
Yeah, and I think I came in with, a pretty similar perspective and quickly realized that this is an extremely different population that takes much consideration to study and much consideration to include in our research.
And for those of us who work at medical centers and are familiar with precision and personalized medicine, for me, the world of intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injury is a epitome of that personalized and precision medicine, because every case is even more unique than the last.
Yeah, I remember one of my first talks I went to as a graduate student, and I think I heard Dr. Chris Giza say, every concussion is a snowflake, because it's so different. And then we started doing work in intimate partner violence and realized that not only is every brain injury different, but every individual is coming to the table with something very different, with a very different history. And for us to do any good work in this, we have to take that person's whole personhood into consideration and the experiences they've had and what they've gone through. We can't just, give a questionnaire and be like, you've got some symptoms, right? We have to really dive into what they've been through in life.
Exactly. And if we think about concussion as either snowflakes or grains of sand, we know that each one is unique. But it's also really hard to count those grains of sand or those snowflakes. Many of us in the field have attempted to quantify the incidence and the prevalence of intimate partner violence alone, brain injury, especially the non-hospitalized brain injury alone. And then when you come together, we don't know what that incidence is.
When I tell people what the incidence is, I say it's extremely high, and we probably will never truly understand the true incidence, but it is so profound and so large, and what we think it is, probably times it by 1,000.
Exactly. And it's also not just in the United States, it's not just in Canada, it's not just North America, it's globally. And it's not something new that just happened in the last couple of years. It's something that has probably gone on since before recorded history, just interpersonal violence and then definitely intimate partner violence. Just as an aside, because my background is actually in translational models of brain injury, I've looked for natural phenomenon, meaning non-human intimate partner violence situations, and there are none in the natural world. We may, at worst, think of a praying mantis that would bite the head off of its mate as an extreme form, but beyond that, there's no other examples of what we as human beings do undertake and put our probably closest allies and partners through.
And I think when we consider that, it's really hard to treat, educate, and figure out how we provide rehabilitation and support to this community.
And with that, you are part of our community. And because of the prevalence, some of you may be affected by the issues of traumatic brain injury and intimate partner violence. And so Carrie has some words of encouragement and caution.
So this is our trigger warning for today. We will be talking about violence against people, violence against women, violence against different communities. And given this prevalence that we just talked about, we realize that this may be a very hard topic for some. So please, as you're listening, take care of yourselves. If you need to step out, please do. No, there's no judgment. If you need to come chat with any of us after this session, please do. We're here, we'll support, and we'll talk with you through any of it.
Well said. That community of people who are here to support you are beyond Carrie and myself and our three speakers today. There's many others in attendance at the conference and many others around the world who focus their attention on it. As we think about this situation where there's clinical need and research need and educational need, we have to redefine the communities and we have to define those community needs. And I know as a basic scientist hanging around in a lab, I'm not in a role to do that.
And as a psychologist who only does research, I don't know that I'm truly in the realm to do that, but I will scream from the rooftops that our social workers are.
Yes. Not just our social workers, but the social workers that are vested in this particular topic. And so with that, we would like to invite Lynn Hogg to join us at the podium to spend a little bit of time of introducing us to the work, one of the many works that she brought to this conference. When we first reached out to her, her first answer was without a doubt yes. The second one was which of the
6
abstract 4 abstracts that she submitted would we like her to talk about? So Lynn, please come up and present your poster.
Right, now a microphone. Hi, and thank you so much for the opportunity to do this today and for thinking of it at all and bringing this together and bringing all of us in the room to have this time together. And yes, I'd love to give a great shout out to social work because I've said it for a long time. I think we are uniquely positioned to make a difference in this particular area and this challenge. And so I'm very proud to be a social worker and bring that voice to the table. And I think it's a really nice segue to talk about what the poster's about here and talk about community. Because for me, community and relationship is what it's all about. And I think one of the things that I've been hearing folks talking about in the room yesterday was how do we make a difference? How do we take what we know and put that to some sort of effective use working with survivors on the front line? And I've had the privilege of doing almost all of my work over the last decade in partnership with community organizations. I just had the absolute delightful moment to see one of our first partners here at the table. She's here now. Sylvia Samsa at the time was with Women's Habitat and helped us build the Abused and Brain Injured Toolkit. And it was probably one of my happiest moments in the last, I don't know how long, to see old friends and colleagues and know that we have worked together to do this work. And the poster that I brought today is to talk about another one and a 3-year project that we've been embarking on, I suppose. And I don't even know, I said, you know, I'm not very sciencey on the best days, but this is probably my least sciencey moment. This is about relationship. This is about helping folks in the community, doing the grassroots work, helping them make a bigger difference with a louder voice. I can sit in my office and generate all the information and research and statistics and all of those things, but if it doesn't get out into the hands of the community, what's the point? And for me, I think it was always very important that my work move forward in that way. And I've been blessed to have the opportunity to do that with multiple community partners. This particular one is the Canadian Royal Purple Society. Started out west in Canada. It's a wonderful story about how they came to be, but it has to do with their male counterparts deciding that they didn't any longer want the women in their service club, and so they kicked them out. And when the women went away and formed their own service club called the Canadian Royal Purple and started raking in a lot of money, and the men discovered that in fact it had been the women who'd been doing the fundraising so successfully, they came running back and said, no, we made a decision, you know, our bad, please come back. And they said, yeah, I don't think so. We're good. And so they have been doing this work for a number of years. They decided that brain injury itself was their national cause. And then they moved on to intimate partner violence and brain injury. And they've been working so diligently to get the message out. They're interested in raising awareness. They're interested in prevention. They've hosted a number of national knowledge campaigns. I'm not a big fan of photographs, but that actually was taken. Thank you, Karen. It's a photograph I quite like. That one was taken out in Saskatoon. Oh, okay. Send that one too. And it was just really fitting. They bring together folks from across the country to raise awareness, to talk about things. They also do that in their communities, and they're interested in creating a roadmap about how can communities work to support survivors when they don't have OTs and they don't have PTs and they don't have brain injury services. What can they do in their coffee shop? What can they do in their local library? How can their community council make a difference? And so we're working with them to develop a roadmap that they're going to now release in the coming months and push that out into the communities on the ground through their own organizations. Purple Thursday is a fantastic idea. They have been developing care bags for shelters, for survivors who are in shelters. They're left in the rooms so that when a survivor enters the shelter for the first night, there's this care bag in the room. And they're filled with donated items of various types, all the kinds of things you can imagine a family might need when they didn't have a chance to put it together when they flee. And along with that is some brain injury information. And all we did was just help them with a brochure. So we just gave them information that we had. We didn't do anything. It's not earth-shattering. It's not rocket science. It's just sharing what we know and helping them make those connections and get the word out. They've actually been turning Canada purple. So they have convinced legislatures and city buildings to light them up purple on Purple Thursday and get the word out and get the community talking that way. This year, they're going to expand their program into Purple Thursday times 7, and they're going to have a whole week. So they're up to all kinds of things, and it's been such an exciting way to do the work and to see this happen and grow. And we just wanted to share that information here for folks and give you just some food for thought on what that can look like and how powerful it can be. I think I'm one person. I can get amplified through Carrie and Johnny, and I'm grateful for it. But this is hundreds of women on the ground across this country who care and really want to make a difference. And all we did was give them the way to do that and work with them to support that. So that's my 5 minutes. I'll sit down.
Come hang
Lynn,
out with
thank
us.
you. Why don't you come join us at the table? I want to just give a big hand to Carrie for being able to restrain herself and not jump in, but I'm going to give her the microphone to ask the first discussion point.
So you made a comment that this is not rocket science doing this, but at the same time, not many of us even know how to start and where to begin. How did that happen?
It happened, I think,
Might have been Sylvia. It might be Sylvia. We held a day where we wanted to get some knowledge out into the community. So Dr. Colantonio and I and a team of researchers in 2016 started this work, and we held the first pan-Canadian IPV brain injury workshop. And like you mentioned, we really worked hard to get 20 people in the room. I think we had to pay half of them to come. And Sylvia's one of them. And she came up to me afterwards and said, I work for this organization. I'm an executive director. This is so important. We really want to do this work with you. How can we partner? What can we do? And so I think it was really, for us, it started about education. And then we had community partners who came, who believed in us, who trusted us to work with them. I've worked with Women at the Center, and a phenomenal organization in Toronto for a number of years. Very survivor-led, survivor-driven. So again, working with people from the front lines, working with people who've experienced it, privileging that knowledge and recognizing that that's what we as researchers need to listen to. We need to see that lived experience, whether that's coming from service provision or service uptake. It's a question of prioritizing them as the folks who know what the world is like and how this works, and then using our skills to bring them the kind of evidence that they might need for funding requests, or helping them to develop training educational modules that can get the word out, and then coming together into a space like this where there's so many different professions at once and sharing that information. Thank you.
Right, that pause is me thinking about the 800 things that I want to talk with you about. As you were presenting your poster, one of the thoughts that went through my head is a conversation many years ago led me to try to change my behavior to listen to understand rather than listening to respond. And in America, at least, or in the US, we definitely listen to respond, like, what am I going to say immediately? But that opportunity to pause allows you to build that community relationship. And as you're talking about all the range of individuals who have touch points with participants and recruits into these studies, it's not a healthcare epidemic. It's like a societal epidemic. Does that ring a bell? Do you have a comment on the fact that we have to get out of a healthcare industry in order to be able to address these concerns?
I think one of the challenges with that, and I actually, this is going to be interesting, Johnny, because I go the other way on this.
Okay.
I think we have to be talking about it as a healthcare issue. So yeah, you and I can dig right in on this
Good.
one. I don't think, like everything to do with intimate partner violence-related brain injury, it's so complex. It's so multi-layered. It's so intersectional. Parts of it are social. Absolutely. Give Karen 30 seconds and she'll tell us what to do with the patriarchy. So, and rightly so, rightly so. There are so many social issues from the top down, but it hasn't worked. So thinking about this as only a social issue has made it something that we can push aside. And I think it's time to talk about this from a different perspective, and bringing a public health lens to this. Maybe that takes away some of the shame and the stigma that goes with it. Maybe that starts to look at, and it's shame and stigma from both sides, both the folks throwing the punches and the people who are getting hit. Mm. It doesn't do any good to demonize anybody. It doesn't solve anything. So maybe if we talk about it from a public health perspective, we can make it doable and necessary to approach this problem.
I really like the way you redirected my thinking on that, because it also puts the ownership on the healthcare industry to sponsor, endorse, and support it, as opposed to what many of us feel, which is you go to the healthcare industry and they say, no, it's a social work problem, no, it's a police problem, no, it's a this problem, and everybody keeps passing the buck. But if we hold their feet to the fire, it's important. Well, and I have to say that the only thing to do with the patriarchy is this.
one thing I do want to talk about here is you ended your talk and your abstract with focusing on women, and definitely, violence against women is leading, but I think, there's other communities that would benefit from being the focus a little bit of this. And so with that, I'd like to welcome up Tori Strange.
What a great segue. Wow.
This is where a commercial in a break would come up, and you would frantically search for the skip 30 seconds on your podcast, like we all do. We've all been there. Just as a disclaimer, this podcast is being audio recorded. It was mentioned in the program.
No, the next one.
Hi, Lynn. How are you doing?
Yes, that's the one.
This is that dead air phenomenon. I got one question for you. I got one question for you. What brand is your microwave?
It's push play.
Okay. That's an inside joke. See? It's funny.
I mean, I was there for it.
I know. Yeah. All right, Tori, welcome.
Thank you so much. Let me just make sure we're all situated here. I feel like this is a podcast, this is a presentation, this is a poster session. So thank you so much for inviting me here to share. I really appreciated the natural way that you're segueing between us. So great work. Maybe a podcast is your second calling. But I am here today to talk about community. So similar to what Lynn was sharing, and I'm sure Carolina will talk about, and Carrie as well, and Johnny, of course. But really just thinking about a community that's sort of been left behind a little bit in the conversation. We did a great job of sort of setting the stage here, recognizing that folks that experience intimate partner violence, are also experiencing or potentially experiencing a brain injury as a result of that physical violence. And a lot of what we know about that has really been shaped around or sort of heterosexual frameworks based on gender and sex norms. And this is more of a calling in than a calling out, really, recognizing that we sort of need to rethink our understanding of what it means to be a perpetrator and what it means to be a victim or a survivor. So, I don't want to get too much into the background here, but we do know that queer folks are experiencing violence in their relationships. And we do know that folks that experience physical violence, most of those injuries are to the face, head, and neck. And as we're learning across the couple days we're together and through this session here, and hopefully we get to hear some talks, in a couple of days, a lot of those folks are experiencing a brain injury. And initially, some of my work was really around answering that, where it says 68% there. So my first sort of task was that was a question mark. So, again, we know people are experiencing violence. We know that they're experiencing injuries to the face, head, neck. What percent, or what's the prevalence of folks that are experiencing that? So we did a small survey. Again, to sort of establish that need. Of course, to no surprise, folks are experiencing brain injury. Queer folks are experiencing a brain injury. Nearly 68% of our sample screened positively for a brain injury. But my next question was sort of like, okay, we know that this is happening. What does it look like when these people go to access care? What do those interactions look like? How can we sort of intervene to make sure that they're having good experiences? So what we did was interview service providers. So through sort of my connections in the community, I was able to connect with folks that work in the gender-based violence field, whether it was in victim services, domestic violence shelters, first responders, executive directors, and talking to them specifically about experiences supporting queer folks who experience intimate partner violence and had also experienced a brain injury as a result. We used an interpretive description analysis, and the goal here was really to sort of give those practice-oriented outcomes. Lynn sort of talked about this, but really sort of bridging that gap between, okay, there's an issue, how do we make that change, right? So, some folks say it takes sort of like 10 years to go from research to clinic. So ID really gives you that option to say, like, okay, what's that immediate change we can make? So there was lots of challenges, but three of the main ones, to no surprise, not a lot of education and training on intimate partner violence in queer communities, particularly intimate partner violence caused brain injury, regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity, which is probably not too much of a surprise. Of course, queer survivors often feel excluded and underserved. And there's also compounding barriers for queer folks. I kind of think of it as a sort of double stigma. So they experience stigma first based on the fact that they're experiencing violence in their relationship and they're experiencing a brain injury, but they're also being stigmatized for being queer. So that really compounds the sort of social determinants of health and their experiences in accessing care. Solutions, oh, there we go. Sort of the exact opposite of that, right? We need to have training and awareness campaigns. We need to think about restructuring our service provider organizations, whether that looks like, checking out our website to make sure that we have a space for queer people to go, maybe reconsider pink washing our website, making sure that our intake forms are inclusive and we have good understandings of what gender is and what sex is. A little on the nose right now, I understand. But thinking about those things and making sure that we're creating safe spaces for queer folks to access these organizations and not feel like they have to train their providers. They're already in an unsafe situation, right? They've already experienced a brain injury in their relationship, and now they are going into a space that is also unsafe. So really creating safe spaces within these organizations is super important for this community. Another thing that came out was making sure that our leadership teams are diverse and our staff are made up with folks with lived and living experience, but really thinking about how we can restructure our services to, again, really get to this community and help them to feel safe. Not stumbling over saying to us LGBTQ, understanding maybe some unique dynamics in queer relationships, thinking about, outing or using transphobic or homophobic language, withholding things central to a person's gender identity, like their hormones or binders or whatever the case may be. These are really unique experiences for queer community members, and we need to sort of take off that heterosexual veil sometimes to understand the needs of this community. I think that's about 5, yeah? Great.
Come join us up here.
Yes. All right, so I got some questions.
Great.
First, I want to thank you for starting this conversation and creating this safe space. I think that your paper was one of the first on this topic, and so legitimately creating a safe space. And so for that, I commend you and say thank you. One of the things I wanted to touch base with is how you approach communities like this. And when I say like this, it doesn't need to be just the queer community, broader than cis, hetero. How did you get in there? How did you create that rapport, that trust that you need to be able to get into communities that are typically ignored and sometimes discriminated against or marginalized?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, Johnny, you did a really great job of sort of starting the answer to that question around sort of doing that self-work first and making sure that you're sort of checking your own bias and checking your own prejudice before you're sort of entering a space. I think having an understanding and acknowledging that sort of historical and cultural context is super important. You don't want to go into a space, again, expecting to be sort of educated on the context in that space. So having that sort of like cultural safety and cultural awareness is super important. I think something that really worked for me is showing up as a community member and a collaborator before a researcher. I think by the time that I went to sort of like recruit and tell people about projects, I had already had relationships with these folks and they didn't even realize that I was doing this work. So I think showing up sort of person first is important. And I think making the research process reciprocal. So making sure that, in Indigenous communities, there's this sort of like nothing about us without us. So making sure that we're sort of listening to the needs of the community and not taking that sort of top-down approach, like I know what you need, sort of listening and taking that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, high five. So I'm gonna flip this, and honestly, this is not just at you. I'm gonna say this is at me. This is probably at a few researchers in this room right now. So, we do research, we go out, we send these questionnaires out, we do these interviews, we get these responses from our survivors or from participants, and then we say, this is what the caregivers are doing wrong, this is what our service providers are not doing, and they need to do this. What is that, like, we're leaving them hanging.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on what that is? How do we move from saying you need to be doing this better to help on how to do that.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure everyone in here would agree, but that like training and awareness and education is super important, right? Being able to, again, call in and say, maybe you're not doing this perfectly, but here's a great way that you can, or a great resource that you can, or an education training module that you and your staff can do, and it's free, and all of these things. But yeah, I mean, you can't just point the finger without giving some type of answer.
It's an important point, and if you were to ask most of us today, how would you develop something? It's go to ChatGPT and let it help to refine something for you, right? So we can take suggestions that Carrie suggested, which is this is what you're doing wrong. Just ask ChatGPT, what should we do? And that could be a safe space in order to be able to move forward. I'm going to just jump into something that showed up because to me, words matter. It's really important that we use the appropriate words for the words that individuals choose for themselves so that it's all appropriate. One of the words you said that I wrote down immediately was a heterosexual veil. And I'm like, I'm imagining heterosexuals with a veil. My son actually
I pictured a wedding.
My son loves
Right.
to dress up in drag.
Oh,
he's
awesome.
queer and he dresses up in drag, and he's absolutely, they, when he's dressing up, is absolutely gorgeous, and could see them in a veil. But then you said pink wash,
Right.
and I understand what that means. It means just don't make everything seem like it's heterosexual, cisgendered female. But in writing opinion pieces, in writing papers, in writing articles and grants, we're almost forced to editorially wash what we write. And I know that I've spoken to people who have written articles on this topic, and they're like, yeah, I would have loved to put that in the discussion. The reviewers made me take it out, or had to change the title so it would be a little bit more acceptable. Mobilize the audience. Like, what do we do to get that onto the printed page so that we can share it? That's the purpose of this podcast, is to say, let's have that courage.
Well, I heard that there's 2 editors later, so we could chat with them about getting into brain injury. But I do think that it is about that. I say this to my students all the time. If everybody in here goes and has 1-2 conversations, we've doubled, tripled our reach. So I think that starting those conversations and putting ourselves in uncomfortable spaces where maybe we don't have every single answer is really important. Of course, yes, sometimes we have to move in certain ways to publish or not perish, and to apply to funding, but I think that we can be dynamic in what we're applying to, and there's still a way that we can include these lenses in those applications, or at least in the work that we're doing. Making sure that we're disaggregating by sex and gender. We're asking that we know the difference between sex and gender is a great start. Little things like that still go a long way, even if we're have a pink website.
I mean, I can ask the panelists up here, when you write a grant and you're envisioning the reviewer reading it at 10 o'clock at night with a glass of red wine, and you don't want to call the reviewer out because they may have some of the violence in their history, you do personally editorially wash it to try to say, we understand it's a problem, but it's not you. Maybe it's I need the money, please review it nicely. It's a challenge. It's an internal struggle.
Yeah, and I think in this framing that we still sort of give credit where credit is due. And a lot of the talking about this, including queer people, I talk a lot about sort of the needed nature of some of the women's movements, and yes, it silenced queer survivors, but those types of conversations were really important in moving what we know about violence from this sort of personal to public space. And yes, it didn't include queer folks, but now we have resources and we have women's shelters and we have places that people can go. So I think it's more of a calling in and still acknowledging that all of this work is super important, and let's not forget about marginalized groups.
Yeah, and I think this, the conversations that we've been having now just really shows us that, we have to be prepared and welcoming, and in how we provide services. And someone who has been doing work in this realm, doing these transitions, guys.
So good.
Thank you. Is Carolina Batari. And so I'm going to invite her to come up now and talk about the work that she's been doing.
Donc, je vais commencer par dire bonjour à tous mes collègues francophones. Vous allez passer plusieurs journées à écouter l'anglais, fait que je vous donne une petite pause de 30 secondes pour vous accueillir et vous remercier d'être présents dans la salle. Donc, hopefully you all understood that. So this is Montréal, and we do speak French here, so just thought I'd put in 2 seconds of that. It's not... Oh, okay.
This is another one of those commercial breaks. For those of you, yeah, we need a sponsor. So if anyone has any, perhaps the SOAR project, which is featured pretty front and center in this particular room, could sponsor podcasts.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to this. I love talking about this. I've been working in brain injury since I graduated, so I won't necessarily say my age, but it's been a very long time. And starting to work with women who have intimate partner violence, honestly has been the most stimulating and the most rewarding and this is important work. So I feel very, very privileged to be having this conversation with all people around the table who've made it so that I can be here. So I'm a clinician. I mean, I'm a researcher, but I approach this as the clinician that I am. So when the shelters heard about all the research of colleagues in the room, and they said, we've been hearing that there's brain injury in the women that we serve, and they knew I worked with brain injury, and they said, can you help us? So I says, well, I know nothing about intimate partner violence, but I do know something about brain injury. So I says, I'm coming to this with all the humility in the world, and the only way I can even start imagining working with you is if you help me and teach me about intimate partner violence. So that's how this started. And I also arrived with all of my worries and concerns because as occupational therapists, when we go evaluate someone, we tend to have a very, I won't say negative focus, but in our reports, we tend to write what's wrong. Why is this person not able to independently do X, Y, Z? And as I entered this world, I'm like, how will that do more harm than good? That was my biggest concern when I started working in this field that I didn't know, that had a lot of lawyers, that, you know, a lot of these women have to go to court, that our reports that we would write as occupational therapists would likely end up in a court, civil law or criminal law. And because I knew nothing about how it would be interpreted, I walked into this with a lot of concern. So what we did in this particular study is we sat down. Can I move this? Can I move this anywhere?
Like 2 fingers.
2 finger, no. Okay. So what I decided is I have to talk to people who know something. And in my research, I work very humbly. I'm like, I know this little piece, and I need all the other heads around the table so that together maybe we'll know a bit more. So I went to get a criminal lawyer, a civil lawyer, who worked with intimate partner violence, and I went to get occupational therapists who'd been to court. I went to get an occupational therapist, work in youth protection, and I says, can we have conversations so that you help us start understanding this context, this world? Because this brain injury in this complex person, in this complex family, in this complex environment, in this complex everything, there was so many levels of complexity. I was rather concerned. So we had these conversations, and the main thing that came up, I don't know how to move this thing. Okay. So the main thing that came up was we have to just be careful, especially when there's youth protection. So most of the women, so I was invited by people who work in shelters, so lots going on for these women who are currently living and temporarily lodging in shelters because they need a lot of protection. And so youth protection is often involved. And so these women will be really likely to go to court. So we wanted to start conversations in terms of what should we know? Please tell us what we should know so that when we're doing evaluations, clinical evaluations, we're not doing more harm. So some of the things that came up was, one, just the diagnosis. The lawyers really told us, if you put a diagnosis, so yes, we want to screen, but the lawyers were like, we're not sure it's going to help the woman to have a diagnosis of TBI. it could actually be held against her. And I says, but probably a lot of perpetrators also have brain injury. Are you going to evaluate them? No, because that's just not how it's done. I'm like, okay. So already I realized I didn't understand how the system worked. But the diagnosis was a concern. And then, like, we realized, can you just stay here? And then the other thing we realize is that these women, so when you work with an athlete, you can say, okay, you're going to not be on the field for X amount of time. You're going to rest till your symptoms are gone. This woman may have 3 children. The children are with her in the shelter. She has to manage the children, and a lot of the children have also experienced violence. They may also have had a brain injury. So you've got this woman who's experiencing all the stress, all the trauma that she experienced, and she's having to manage sometimes 3 children who've also experienced trauma, and so they're all like little bombshells ready to explode. And our expectations of mothers, that's what the lawyers keep telling me, our expectations of mothers in our society are way higher than our expectations of men, of fathers. Sorry, I'm not gendered or anything, sorry. This is just the words that have been said to me. So our expectations are higher, but this woman may have to go bring her children to daycare. She may have to go to the food bank because a lot of the men were taking all the finances, and the women are financially insecure, so they have to go get to the food shelters, and the shelters are often very isolated, so they have to take 3 buses to go get the food, and they got to bring their kids, and they've got to carry their food, and they've got a brain injury. So how can we help? Has really been the conversation. And with youth protection, the specific component of youth protection is, so what do we write in our reports, and how do we work with youth protection? Because youth protection has clearly told me we will be there. So the only way to really help the women is if we learn to work together. And my whole thing, I'll just finish on this, is I think that we need to bring rehab for brain injury into the shelters. Mm-hmm. The women are not in any sort of position when we start seeing what they're having to manage. They're not in any position to come to our rehab hospitals. We need to go to them. And yes, so I'm along the mind frame of let's do community-based rehab. Let's us integrate. Let's let ourselves be destabilized and not know the environment, instead of asking always the women to adapt to our environment where we're safe in our rehab hospitals and our offices. That's not where they're safe. Thanks.
Carolina, you did such a wonderful job of bringing us into that world. And previously, we were talking about the idea that that which is in the literature doesn't actually exist in the real world. Like, it doesn't give you a good example. Many years ago, the Government Accountability Office in the United States put together a report on intimate partner violence. And when they contacted us in Arizona, they said, oh, we've read all the literature, we know exactly what's going on. And we said, no, why don't you come have a look? And then they threw all the literature out. And it's not demeaning to anybody in the audience who wrote those papers, but it doesn't tell the whole picture. Just being in that community is so, so important. And I just want to echo and amplify your voice that it's necessary to be engaged with individuals who are engaged with these individuals so that we can get a better understanding without just doing descriptive analyses. I don't really have a question. It's just I need to amplify that.
It must have
message.
been really clear.
One thing I wanted to sort of touch base with you is, we're starting to hear a lot that our survivors no longer want to be assessed or diagnosed with brain injury for what you talked about. And, then it's sort of exponentiating this cycle where we're not getting services and we're not getting rehabilitation. So what's the middle ground? Like, how do we do it safely, but make sure that we're getting services, but it can't be used against them in court where you're then fearing losing children or whatnot? Like, what's the middle ground?
I think we'll have to all figure that out together, would be my answer. I think what we've been, so we're working on an ecosystem of care in Montreal, so we got funding to do that, and we're trying to mobilize all the different partners in the legal system, in the community, in the healthcare, and just like the more people can talk, I think the more we understand each other, the more we understand the worlds that each of us live in, I think we'll start maybe sorting it out. But I think that's the only way. It's collective intelligence. There's this great podcast on collective intelligence, if ever, and I think that's what we need for this, because they have problems in every area. And I think if we don't think of this as collective intelligence, whatever solution we come up with will likely be lacking important components.
So before you actually started speaking, I was looking at our other panelists and wondering if you guys have comments for each other. I'm going to pass the microphone in case there's a thought. Looking for eye contact, acknowledgement. Lynn has something.
I just want to say how much I appreciate what you're doing and that notion of bringing care into the community. I know that we think that what we're doing as academics and researchers, you know, we're out there creating knowledge, and it's such a responsibility to do that. And in a situation where there is this unbelievable complexity, it just, you can't wrap your mind around it most of the time in terms of how to do it. And the only way that we will make a difference is to do this together. I have absolutely no doubt about that. And I think what is so rewarding to hear from across this panel is all the different ways in which that's happening. And if all of us here do anything with our time while we're here, talk to each other. Come and talk to me. Come and talk to Carolina, to Tori, to any of us about the tiny little idea that you've got brewing in the back of your mind, because we're bound to figure out another way to do this, bigger, broader, better, and maybe then we can make a difference.
I think I was going to actually take one of your thoughts, because I believe in a paper of yours to answer your question around sort of like this default suspicion of brain injury, and maybe we don't need to operate from a diagnosis that's going to harm someone in court. But the way you worded that response, I feel like I shouldn't have spoke. So
We're actually really grateful for the panelists, for the audience, for being here. We do want to maintain or be on time for this particular podcast. It's critically important because it actually hasn't been brought up in terms of what is intimate partner violence for the person that experiences it. It is not a single catastrophic brain injury that puts them in the ICU for a couple months and disorders of consciousness state and recovery. It is a repeated cycle of physical, emotional, psychological abuse that basically undermines their humanity. There's no other way of putting it. And so this morning, one of the words that I took away from one of the keynotes was that brain injury is an endless cycle of recovery. And when you add intimate partner violence, it's an endless cycle of recovery plus repeated injuries. My caution to the entire community is that we can't keep describing the epidemiology. We have to do what our panelists did, which is go out there and say, where are the issues? What are potential solutions, even if they become obvious once we analyze all the data. But all of our work needs to end with an action item, including this podcast. Got any?
I mean, I got a few right now. I think the biggest take home we can do is we need to reduce the stigma surrounding IPV and IPV brain injuries. We need to talk about the discrimination that happens to different communities that experience these injuries. And we need to not exclude people. We need to be talking about sex and gender, and we need to be including all people in this conversation. And we all need to be standing on the rooftops screaming about this. We need to be unafraid to take the microphone and talk about it. We need to empower each other to talk to survivors, to move this forward, and we all need to work together. We need to work with our service providers. We need to work with our researchers. We need to work with our trainees who are taking, the baton from us and moving this field so far forward compared to where we've been. And to close, if you are still interested in learning more about this, Lynn has one of her 15 posters. rapid session at 2:30. There's a strangulation session happening after this. There's a session on Saturday, all dedicated to IPV. There is the Enigma Consortium and Pink Concussions have announced their concussion or their IPV brain injury conference will be November 5th and 6th, 2025. And a big shout out to the newly launched, you need to put the title down for me, thank you. The newly launched Canadian Center for IPV Brain Injury. So you guys are truly going to move the needles forward.
Thank you so much. Tune in tomorrow.